Excuse me, sweetheart. Economy is that way. This section is for paying customers. Those were the first words Victoria Ashworth spoke to Dr. Camila Rodriguez, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. Victoria stood in the narrow aisle of American Airlines Flight 447, her perfectly manicured finger pointing toward the back of the plane like she was directing traffic. Before we dive into this incredible true story of privilege, prejudice, and the power of standing up for what's right, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe every passenger deserves respect, regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. It was 7:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. Flight 447 to Miami was already running 20 minutes behind schedule due to a computer glitch in the boarding system. The business class cabin buzzed with the restless energy of important people with important places to be. Dr. Camila Rodriguez had just finished an 18-hour neurosurgery at Mount Sinai Hospital. She was 28 years old with kind eyes that held the weight of life and death decisions and hands that had just saved a child's life. She wore navy blue scrubs under a casual denim jacket, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. In her carry-on bag were medical journals she planned to review during the flight and a presentation that could revolutionize childhood brain tumor treatment. Camila moved quietly down the jet bridge boarding pass in hand, exhaustion evident in every step. She found her seat. 3A, a business class window seat she'd upgraded to using miles earned from countless medical conferences. She settled in immediately, putting on noise-canceling headphones and closing her eyes. All she wanted was 3 hours of peace before presenting her research at the Miami Medical Conference. That peace lasted exactly 47 seconds. Victoria Ashworth entered the cabin like she owned the aircraft. At 45, she was the trophy wife of Richard Ashworth, a Manhattan real estate mogul worth $800 million. Victoria had spent the last decade perfecting the art of looking expensive. Her platinum blonde hair fell in calculated waves around her surgically enhanced face. She wore a custom Chanel suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, carried a limited-edition Hermes Birkin bag, and had the kind of gym-toned body that required a personal trainer, a nutritionist, and enough Botox to erase any hint of actual emotion from her features. Victoria surveyed the cabin with the practiced eye of someone who ranked people by their net worth. Her gaze swept past the businessman in 1A reading the Wall Street Journal, the elderly woman in 2B wearing pearls, and landed on Camila in 3A. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed. Victoria had built her entire identity around exclusivity. She belonged to country clubs that had waiting lists longer than most people's careers. She vacationed in places that required helicopters to reach. She bought handbags that came with their own security details. And she absolutely could not comprehend why someone in scrubs was sitting in her section. "Sweetheart Victoria," said again, her voice carrying across the cabin. Several passengers looked up from their phones and laptops. "I think you're lost." Camila opened her eyes slowly and removed one earbud. She looked up at Victoria with the patient expression of someone who'd dealt with difficult people before. In her line of work, she encountered grieving families, panicked residents, and demanding department heads daily. She knew how to stay calm under pressure. "I'm sorry," Camila said politely. "Your seat," Victoria said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the plane. "Economy class is behind the curtain. This section requires a special boarding pass." Camila reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it up without a word. The seat number was clearly printed 3A. Victoria stared at the boarding pass like it had personally offended her. "There's obviously been a mistake," she said, her voice rising slightly. "People like you don't fly business class." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The businessman in 1A lowered his newspaper. The elderly woman in 2B stopped digging through her purse. Even the flight attendants in the galley went quiet. Jake Morrison, a 26-year-old college student heading home to Miami, was sitting in seat 4C when he heard Victoria's comment. Jake had grown up in a household where his parents taught him that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. He quietly pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. "Ma'am," came a voice from the front of the cabin. Flight attendant Maria Santos approached with the kind of professional smile that barely concealed frustration. Maria was 32 years old, had been flying for 8 years, and had seen enough entitled passengers to write a book, but something about Victoria's tone made her stomach clench. "There seems to be some confusion," Maria said diplomatically. "May I see both of your boarding passes?" Victoria thrust her boarding pass at Maria like she was handing down a royal decree. "I'm in 3B, but there's clearly been an error with the seating chart. This person cannot possibly have a legitimate business class ticket." Maria examined both boarding passes, then checked her tablet. The manifest was clear. Dr. C. Rodriguez, seat 3. A upgrade purchased with frequent flyer miles 6 days ago. Mrs. V. Ashworth, seat 3. B. Full-price business class ticket purchased 3 weeks ago. "Actually, ma'am," Maria said carefully, "both tickets are valid. Dr. Rodriguez is correctly seated in 3A. Victoria's face flushed pink beneath her makeup. "Doctor?" She looked Camila up and down like she was examining a counterfeit designer handbag. "In scrubs." "How convenient. Let me guess you're a doctor of pharmacy at CVS." The insult landed exactly as Victoria intended. But instead of the explosive reaction she expected, Camila simply took a deep breath. "I'm a neurosurgeon," Camila said quietly. "I just finished operating on a 7-year-old boy with a brain tumor. The surgery lasted 18 hours. I saved his life. Now I'd like to rest for 3 hours before my next presentation." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade away. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then she did what entitled people do when confronted with facts that contradict their worldview. She doubled down. Neurosurgeon Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Maria, I want to speak with someone in charge. I did not pay $3,000 for this seat to sit next to someone who's clearly lying about their credentials." Jake, still recording from 2 rows back, zoomed in on Victoria's face. He had already captured enough material to go viral, but he sensed this was just the beginning. Maria's professional composure began to crack. "Ma'am, I've verified both passengers' tickets. Everything is in order." "Nothing is in order," Victoria snapped. "Look at her. Look at how she's dressed. Look at her hair. Does she look like someone who belongs in business class? Use your eyes, Maria. Use your common sense." That's when Carlos Mendez, a 40-year-old business consultant in seat 2A, finally spoke up. "Lady, what exactly do you think doctors are supposed to look like?" Victoria whirled around to face him. "Excuse me, but this doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone on this plane," Carlos replied. "You're making assumptions about someone based on their appearance, and frankly, it's disgusting. I'm making observations based on standards," Victoria shot back. "This is business class, not a charity ward." Sarah Williams, the head flight attendant, emerged from the galley. Sarah was 43, had been flying for 22 years, and had seen Victoria's type before. Rich, bored, and convinced that money was the same as class. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Victoria said immediately. "I want this person removed from business class. I want her moved to economy where she belongs, and I want an apology for the inconvenience." Sarah looked at Camila, who sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap, then back at Victoria, who stood in the aisle with her hands on her hips like she was posing for a magazine cover about righteous indignation. "Ma'am, I cannot and will not move a passenger who is correctly seated simply because another passenger objects to their presence." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Then I want to speak with the captain." "Immediately." "That's not necessary," Sarah said. "It absolutely is necessary," Victoria replied. I want someone with real authority to handle this situation. Someone who understands the value of customer service and the importance of maintaining standards. She pulled out her phone and began dialing. Richard. Yes, it's me. I need you to use your connections with American Airlines immediately. I'm being harassed on the plane and they're refusing to help me. Jake's phone captured every word. He had been live streaming on TikTok for the past 5 minutes, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. Comments flooded the screen faster than he could read them. Karen alert. Someone, stop this woman. Where's the manager when you need one? This is insane. What none of the passengers knew was that somewhere in the corporate headquarters of American Airlines, a very important phone call was about to be made. A call that would change everything. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Right now, Victoria was just getting started. Richard, listen to me carefully. Victoria hissed into her phone, her voice carrying across the business class cabin. I am being threatened by an aggressive passenger, and the flight crew is taking her side. I need you to call someone important at American Airlines right now. She paced the narrow aisle like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking against the aircraft floor with each agitated step. Other passengers watched in a mixture of fascination and horror, like witnessing a traffic accident in real time. Jake Morrison kept his phone trained on the scene, his TikTok livestream now attracting viewers from around the world. The comment section exploded with reactions. This is wild. Someone needs to stop this lady. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Hashtag Flight 447. Drama is about to trend. On the other end of the phone, Richard Ashworth sat in his corner office overlooking Central Park, rubbing his temples as his wife's voice shrilled through the speaker. He had built a real estate empire by reading people, and he could tell Victoria was spiraling into one of her episodes. Victoria, calm down, Richard said wearily. What exactly is happening? I'm sitting next to someone who clearly doesn't belong in business class, Victoria said loud enough for everyone to hear. She's wearing hospital scrubs, for God's sake. She looks like she just walked out of an emergency room. The flight attendants are claiming she's a doctor, but we both know that's impossible. Camila sat quietly in her seat, her eyes closed, trying to block out the chaos swirling around her. She had dealt with difficult family members in the ICU, demanding surgeons in the operating room, and exhausted residents during 36-hour shifts. But this was different. This was personal. This was someone attacking not just her profession, but her right to exist in the same space. Ma'am, Sarah Williams said, approaching Victoria again. I need you to end your phone call and return to your seat. We're preparing for departure. Victoria held up one perfectly manicured finger. Richard, did you hear that? They're trying to silence me now. This is discrimination against a paying customer. The only discrimination happening here is what you're doing to that Dr. Carlos Mendez said from his seat. He had been trying to stay out of the situation, but Victoria's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. Nobody asked for your opinion, Victoria snapped at Carlos. And I highly doubt she's actually a doctor. People will say anything to justify being somewhere they don't belong. That's when Camila finally opened her eyes and spoke. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, she said, her voice steady and professional. But I've shown my boarding pass, the flight attendants have verified my seat assignment, and I just want to get to my medical conference in peace. I've been awake for 22 hours straight saving a child's life. I'm not looking for a confrontation. Victoria turned to face Camila directly, her eyes blazing with something that went beyond mere annoyance. A child's life. Really? That's the story you're going with? Let me guess. You were the head surgeon on some complicated procedure that saved the day. I was the lead neurosurgeon removing a brain tumor from a 7-year-old boy named Marcus Camila, replied calmly. The tumor was pressing against his motor cortex. One wrong move could have left him paralyzed for life. We started the surgery yesterday at 1 p.m. and finished at 7 a.m. this morning. Marcus is now in recovery and expected to make a full recovery. The specificity of her answer seemed to momentarily stun Victoria, but she recovered quickly. Anyone can make up medical details, Victoria said dismissively. That doesn't prove anything. Sarah, I want this woman's credentials verified immediately. Call the hospital. Call someone who can confirm she's actually who she claims to be. Ma'am, that's not how airline security works, Sarah explained patiently. We verify identification and tickets, not professional credentials. Then you need to make an exception, Victoria demanded. I feel unsafe sitting next to someone who's lying about their identity. For all we know, she could be dangerous. She could be unstable. She's certainly acting suspicious by refusing to prove who she is. Jake's live stream viewer count had now surpassed 50,000 people. The hashtag Flight447. Drama was trending on TikTok, and other passengers were starting to record their own videos. The situation was spiraling beyond anything the flight crew had been trained to handle. Maria Santos, who had been quietly observing from the galley, finally stepped forward. She was a single mother from Queens who had worked 2 jobs to afford flight attendant training. She knew what it felt like to be judged by appearance, to have people assume you didn't belong in certain spaces. Mrs. Ashworth Maria said, her voice firm but respectful. I've been flying for 8 years. I've seen passengers from every walk of life. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, construction workers, retirees, students. They don't all dress the same way or look the same way. What they have in common is that they purchased a ticket for a seat on this aircraft just like you did. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. I called my contact at AA. They're looking into it. Try to calm down. Richard is handling this, Victoria announced triumphantly, waving her phone like a trophy. He has connections with the airline's board of directors. This whole situation is going to be resolved very quickly. What Victoria didn't know was that her husband's connection was actually David Morrison's assistant, and the message had gone directly to the CEO's emergency line. David Morrison was currently reviewing Jake's TikTok live stream on his phone while sitting in his car outside Terminal 4, preparing to board the same flight for a surprise inspection of customer service standards. Back in the cabin, the elderly woman in seat 2B finally spoke up. Her name was Eleanor Patterson, and she was 82 years old. She had lived through the civil rights movement, had seen segregation firsthand, and recognized the ugly undertones of what was happening. Young Lady Eleanor said, addressing Victoria with the kind of authority that comes from 8 decades of life experience. I don't know who you think you are, but your behavior is absolutely shameful. That woman has done nothing but sit quietly in her assigned seat. Victoria whirled around to face Eleanor. With all due respect, ma'am, this doesn't concern you either. It concerns every decent person on this airplane, Eleanor replied firmly. You're making a spectacle of yourself, and frankly, you're embarrassing everyone in this section. I'm embarrassing. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not the one dressed like I'm about to mop floors. I'm not the one pretending to be something I'm not. What exactly do you think she's pretending to be? Carlos asked. A doctor, Victoria said immediately. Look at her. Really look at her. Does she look like someone who went to medical school? Does she look like someone who belongs in an operating room? The racism in her words was no longer subtle. It hung in the air like a toxic cloud, making everyone in the cabin uncomfortable. Several passengers pulled out their phones to record. The hashtag Flight447 was now trending on Twitter as well as TikTok. Captain Michael Harper's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay while our crew addresses a passenger concern. We appreciate your patience and expect to be airborne shortly. Victoria took this as validation. See, even the captain knows there's a problem. What she didn't realize was that Captain Harper was actually buying time. He had been informed by ground control that the CEO of American Airlines was requesting permission to board the aircraft for an operational assessment. In his 30 years of flying, Harper had never received such a request. Sarah Williams received a message on her tablet that made her eyebrows rise. She showed it to Maria, whose eyes widened. The message was simple but extraordinary. CEO boarding in 2 minutes for customer service evaluation. Continue normal operations, Mrs. Ashworth. Sarah said, I need you to return to your seat immediately. We have another passenger boarding and you're blocking the aisle. Who's boarding? Victoria demanded. We're already 20 minutes late. A company representative, Sarah, replied diplomatically. Victoria's face lit up. Finally, someone with authority is coming to resolve this situation. I want that woman removed from this section immediately. I want her moved to economy, and I want a full refund for the inconvenience. Camila opened her eyes again and looked directly at Victoria. Ma'am, I'm not moving. I paid for this seat just like you did. I have every right to be here. Rights. Victoria laughed harshly. You want to talk about rights? I have the right to feel safe and comfortable in a section I paid premium prices for. I have the right to fly with people who meet certain standards. What standards? Camila asked quietly. Victoria gestured vaguely at Camila's appearance. Standards of dress, standards of behavior, standards of appropriateness. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the cabin knew exactly what Victoria meant, but she hadn't quite crossed the line into explicit racism. She was dancing right up to the edge using coded language that allowed her to maintain plausible deniability. Jake's live stream had now reached 75,000 viewers with hundreds of comments flowing in every second. The story was breaking out of TikTok and spreading across other social media platforms. News outlets were beginning to pick up the hashtag. And at that moment, footsteps echoed through the jet bridge as David Morrison, CEO of American Airlines, walked toward the aircraft door. Victoria Ashworth was about to meet someone with real authority. She just had no idea that the authority was about to side against her. Elena Vasquez was having a perfectly normal Tuesday morning until her phone exploded with notifications. As American Airlines corporate relations manager, she monitored social media for potential PR disasters, but she had never seen anything escalate this quickly. Hashtag Flight 447. Drama was trending nationally. Hashtag business class. Karen had over 200,000 mentions in the past 30 minutes. Jake Morrison's live stream had broken 100,000 concurrent viewers and was being shared across every major platform. Elena sat in her office on the 20th floor of American Airlines headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, watching multiple screens simultaneously. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. The story was everywhere and growing exponentially. Her secure phone rang. It was David Morrison. Elena, tell me you're seeing this. David's voice came through crystal clear as he walked through JFK Terminal 4. I'm seeing it, sir. Flight 447 to Miami. We have a passenger harassment situation that's gone completely viral. The optics are... She paused, searching for the right word. Catastrophic. David was already at gate B47, showing his identification to the gate agent. What do we know? Elena pulled up the passenger manifest on her computer. Victoria Ashworth, seat 3B. Wife of real estate developer Richard Ashworth. She's harassing Dr. Camila Rodriguez in seat 3A. Dr. Rodriguez is a neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. The harassment appears to be racially motivated, though Mrs. Ashworth is using coded language. Coded language. She's questioning Dr. Rodriguez's right to be in business class, making comments about standards and appropriateness, suggesting the doctor doesn't look like someone who belongs in that section. David stopped walking. And this is being live-streamed by multiple passengers. The primary stream has over 100,000 viewers. It's spreading to news outlets. Senator Davis just retweeted a clip with commentary about airline discrimination. This could trigger a congressional inquiry. As Elena spoke, she watched the American Airlines stock price on her second monitor. It had already dropped 2% in the past hour, and the trading volume was spiking. I'm boarding the aircraft now, David said. Patch me through to the flight crew. I want real-time updates on everything that's being said and done. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard connecting to the flight's internal communication system. "You're connected, sir. Flight attendants Sarah Williams and Maria Santos are your primary contacts." David's earpiece crackled as Sarah Williams' voice came through. "Mr. Morrison, this is Sarah. I've been briefed that you're boarding for an assessment." "That's correct. Update me on the situation. Mrs. Ashworth is demanding that Dr. Rodriguez be moved to economy class. She's made several inappropriate comments about the doctor's appearance and qualifications. Dr. Rodriguez has remained professional and calm throughout the confrontation. Has Mrs. Ashworth made any explicitly racial statements?" "Not explicitly, sir. She's using phrases like people like you and standards of appropriateness, but she hasn't used racial slurs or direct language." David nodded as he walked down the jet bridge. He had dealt with discrimination cases before, and he knew how these situations typically unfolded. Privileged passengers often used coded language that allowed them to claim their behavior wasn't racial while making their actual intentions crystal clear. Meanwhile, back in her office, Elena was coordinating a massive corporate response. Her team of 12 social media specialists was monitoring the situation across all platforms, preparing statements and developing containment strategies. Elena came a voice from across the office. It was Marcus Chen, her deputy manager. "CNN just called. They want a statement about the Flight 447 incident. What did you tell them? That we're investigating and will have a response shortly, but they're planning to run the story in their next hourly update regardless." Elena cursed under her breath. Once CNN picked up the story, it would spread to every major news outlet within hours. They were looking at a full-scale PR crisis. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard Ashworth. "My wife is being harassed by airline staff. I demand immediate action." Elena showed the message to Marcus. "The husband is applying pressure. Do we know anything about him?" Elena pulled up a quick background search. Richard Ashworth, Ashworth Real Estate Development. Net worth approximately $800 million. Politically connected. Has donated to several politicians who sit on transportation committees. This complicated things significantly. Ashworth had the kind of money and connections that could make problems for the airline if handled incorrectly. But the social media storm was growing so large that appeasing one wealthy passenger could backfire spectacularly. Elena's earpiece buzzed as David Morrison's voice came through the system. "I'm about to board the aircraft. Elena, I want you to prepare 3 response scenarios. 1 where we side with Mrs. Ashworth, 1 where we remain neutral, and 1 where we take action against Mrs. Ashworth." "Sir, if I may," Elena said carefully, siding with Mrs. Ashworth at this point would be corporate suicide. The social media response is overwhelmingly against her. Even attempting neutrality could be seen as complicity. David paused at the aircraft door. "Elaborate." "We have over 50 TikTok videos from different angles now. The story is being framed as airline allows racist passenger to harass doctor. If we don't take a strong stance, we become the villain. Our brand reputation is on the line." Through his earpiece, David could hear the ongoing confrontation in the business class cabin. Victoria Ashworth's voice carried clearly. "I don't care what her credentials supposedly are. I paid for exclusivity and I expect it." Dr. Rodriguez's calm response followed. "I just want to get to my medical conference. I'm not bothering anyone." Victoria again. "Your presence here bothers me. You don't belong in this section." David had heard enough. "Elena, prepare the 3rd scenario, full corporate response against discriminatory behavior, and get me everything you can find on Dr. Rodriguez. I want to know exactly who we're defending." Elena's team had already compiled a preliminary file. Dr. Camila Rodriguez, age 28, neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. Graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School. Completed residency at Johns Hopkins. Specializes in pediatric brain tumor removal. She's presenting research at the Miami Medical Conference that could revolutionize childhood cancer treatment. David smiled grimly. Victoria Ashworth had picked the wrong target. Sir Elena continued. Dr. Rodriguez has saved over 300 children's lives in the past 2 years. She's been featured in Medical Journal Quarterly as one of the most promising young surgeons in America. If this story becomes about an airline allowing harassment of a pediatric neurosurgeon, the public relations impact will be devastating for Mrs. Ashworth and overwhelmingly positive for us. Understood. I'm going in. As David stepped onto the aircraft, Elena began implementing crisis management protocol. Her team started drafting press releases, preparing social media responses, and coordinating with legal to ensure they were protected from any potential lawsuits. But Elena knew that the real resolution was about to happen, 30,000 feet below her office in the business class cabin of Flight 447, where the CEO of American Airlines was about to confront entitled privilege head-on. The live stream viewer count had just surpassed 150,000 people. The whole world was watching, and Victoria Ashworth was about to learn that money doesn't always buy the outcome you expect. David Morrison stepped through the aircraft door at exactly 8:47 a.m. and immediately felt the tension crackling through the cabin like electricity before a thunderstorm. The CEO of American Airlines was 52 years old with silver hair and the kind of quiet confidence that came from 30 years in the aviation industry. He wore a simple navy suit and carried a black leather briefcase looking like any other business traveler. What he saw in the business class cabin made his jaw tighten. Victoria Ashworth stood in the aisle, blocking the path between seats, her designer outfit and aggressive posture, making her look like a storm system in Chanel. Her voice carried across the cabin as she spoke into her phone with theatrical urgency. "Richard, they're refusing to help me. The flight attendants are taking her side. I need you to call someone higher up the food chain because clearly no one on this aircraft understands customer service." Dr. Camila Rodriguez sat quietly in seat 3. Her noise-canceling headphones around her neck, her hands folded in her lap with the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with crisis situations. She looked exhausted, and David could see the fatigue in her eyes that came from hours of life-saving surgery. Jake Morrison, in seat 4C, had his phone trained on the confrontation, his TikTok live stream now approaching 200,000 viewers. The comment section scrolled past so quickly it looked like a digital waterfall. "This is insane. Someone stop this, Karen." "That poor doctor. Where's airline security? This is going viral worldwide." David quietly took seat 1A directly in front of the confrontation. Sarah Williams, the head flight attendant, noticed him immediately and approached with professional concern. "Sir, I'm sorry, but that seat is—" "Oh." She stopped mid-sentence as she recognized him. Her eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Mr. Morrison, we weren't expecting—" "Continue normal operations," Sarah David said quietly. "I'm here to observe." Victoria, still on her phone, overheard the exchange and turned to look at David with interest. "Morrison, are you with the airline?" David looked up at her with the calm expression of someone who had faced down airline boards, congressional hearings, and crisis situations. "I work for American Airlines." "Yes." Victoria's face lit up like she had just discovered buried treasure. "Perfect. Finally, someone with authority. I need you to resolve this situation immediately." "What situation is that?" David asked evenly. Victoria gestured dramatically toward Camila. "This person is clearly in the wrong section. She's dressed inappropriately, she's making claims about being a doctor that are obviously false, and the flight crew is refusing to move her to economy where she belongs." David's earpiece crackled as Elena Vasquez's voice came through from headquarters. "Sir, we're now at 200,000 viewers on the primary live stream. CNN is running the story in their next update. Bloomberg is calling for comment." Through his earpiece, he could hear the rapid-fire updates from his crisis management team, but his focus remained on the scene in front of him. "Ma'am," David said to Victoria, "what makes you believe this passenger doesn't belong in business class?" Victoria laughed as if the question itself was absurd. Just look at her. Look at how she's dressed. Look at her general presentation. I paid $3,000 for exclusivity, and I expect a certain standard of passenger. What standard is that? The kind of people who actually belong in business class. People who dress appropriately, who conduct themselves with dignity, who don't make up stories about being doctors to justify being somewhere they clearly don't belong. David glanced at Jake, who was recording every word. The young man gave him a slight nod, and David realized that Jake had captured the entire confrontation from the beginning. "Dr. Rodriguez," David said, addressing Camila directly. "May I see your boarding pass?" Camila handed him her boarding pass and identification without a word. David examined both carefully, then pulled out his phone and discreetly opened the American Airlines internal system. Within seconds, he had Dr. Rodriguez's complete passenger profile. The information that appeared on his screen was remarkable. Doctor Camila Rodriguez, frequent flyer member since medical school, had flown American Airlines over 200 times in the past 5 years for medical conferences, research presentations, and emergency consultations. She had never had a single complaint, had upgraded using miles earned through legitimate travel, and had consistently been rated as a courteous passenger by flight crews. But what really caught David's attention was a note in her file from 18 months ago. During a flight from Boston to Los Angeles, Dr. Rodriguez had assisted with a medical emergency when a passenger suffered a heart attack. Her quick action had saved the man's life, and the grateful passenger's family had written a letter to the airline praising her professionalism and skill. Dr. Rodriguez, David said, "I see that you upgraded to business class using frequent flyer miles. How many miles did you have in your account?" "About 400,000, Camila replied quietly. "I travel frequently for medical conferences and research presentations." Victoria scoffed loudly. 400,000 miles. Right. Where exactly would someone like her accumulate that many miles? David's earpiece crackled again. This time, it was Elena with an urgent update. "Sir, we've just confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's credentials through Mount Sinai Hospital. She's not just a neurosurgeon. She's the head of pediatric brain tumor research. She's presenting breakthrough research in Miami that could save thousands of children's lives. If this story becomes about harassment of a world-class pediatric surgeon, the public relations impact will be enormous." David nodded almost imperceptibly, then looked back at Victoria. "Mrs. Ashworth, what exactly do you want the airline to do?" Victoria straightened, sensing that she finally had someone in authority willing to listen. "I want her moved to economy class immediately. I want an apology for this inconvenience. And I want assurance that American Airlines will maintain proper standards in its premium sections. And if the airline refuses, then my husband will use his connections to ensure that appropriate action is taken. Richard knows people on the board of directors. We're not some random passengers you can ignore." David could hear the threat clearly, and he could see that other passengers were recording the conversation. The elderly woman in seat 2B looked disgusted. Carlos Mendez in seat 2A was shaking his head. Jake's live stream chat was exploding with outrage. "Mrs. Ashworth." David said slowly, "May I ask what specific behavior or action by Dr. Rodriguez has caused you concern?" "She doesn't belong here," Victoria repeated, as if saying it more emphatically would make it more true. "Look at her. Really look at her. Does she look like someone who went to medical school? Does she look like someone who saves lives in an operating room?" The racism in her statement was no longer coded. She was making her prejudice explicit, and everyone in the cabin could hear it clearly. Camila Rodriguez finally spoke, her voice steady but firm. "Ma'am, I've been respectful and quiet since I boarded this aircraft. I've shown my boarding pass, I've explained my profession, and I've tried to avoid confrontation. But I will not be moved from a seat I paid for simply because you don't like how I look." Victoria's face flushed red. "Don't like how you look. This isn't about looks. It's about standards." "What standards?" Camila asked again. "Standards of dress, standards of behavior, standards of—" "Standards of what?" David interjected quietly. Victoria hesitated for the first time since the confrontation began. She realized she was being recorded by multiple passengers and that her words were being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. But her anger and entitlement overcame her caution. "Standards of the kind of people who belong in business class," she finished. Elena's voice came through David's earpiece again. "Sir, that statement just guaranteed this story will lead every major news broadcast tonight. We have clear evidence of discriminatory behavior being live-streamed to over 200,000 people." David stood up slowly, and every eye in the business class cabin focused on him. He was about to make a decision that would define not just this flight, but his entire tenure as CEO. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned about belonging anywhere. "I think there's been enough disruption to this flight." Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Finally, someone who understands the situation. I want her removed immediately." David looked directly into Jake's camera phone, knowing that his next words would be seen by hundreds of thousands of people and replayed on news broadcasts around the world. "Actually," he said calmly, "I think you misunderstood what I meant." The smile began to fade from Victoria's face. "I'm David Morrison," he continued, "and I'm the CEO of American Airlines." The business class cabin fell completely silent. Even the background noise of the aircraft system seemed to fade away. Victoria's mouth fell open. Jake's live stream chat exploded so rapidly that individual comments became impossible to read, and Dr. Rodriguez David continued looking directly at Camila. "I owe you an apology on behalf of American Airlines for the treatment you've received today." Victoria's face went from red to white in the span of 3 seconds. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. The game had just changed completely. The silence that followed David Morrison's revelation lasted exactly 4 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Victoria Ashworth stood frozen in the aisle, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Her brain was struggling to process the fact that the man she had just been lecturing about customer service was actually the CEO of the entire airline. Jake Morrison's TikTok livestream chat had completely exploded. The viewer count had just surpassed 300,000 people, and comments were flooding in so fast they created a blur of text. "Oh my God, the CEO she's done for this is incredible. Karen just met her match best plot twist ever." Elena Vasquez's voice crackled through David's earpiece from headquarters. "Sir, we're watching the live stream from the crisis center. Social media is going absolutely nuclear. Hashtag Flight 447 is the #1 trending topic in the United States." Victoria finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "CEO. You're actually—" "I'm actually the person responsible for ensuring that every passenger on American Airlines is treated with dignity and respect," David said calmly. "Regardless of what they look like, regardless of what they're wearing, and regardless of whether they meet another passenger's personal standards of who belongs where." Victoria's survival instincts kicked in, and she immediately tried to backtrack. "Mr. Morrison, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to discriminate against anyone. I was simply concerned about passenger safety and appropriate seating arrangements." "Passenger safety," David repeated. "What specific safety threat did you observe from Dr. Rodriguez?" "Well, the situation was—" Victoria stumbled over her words, realizing that every possible answer would make her look worse. "I was concerned about the validity of her ticket." "Her ticket has been verified multiple times by multiple crew members," David replied. "What other concerns did you have?" Victoria glanced desperately around the cabin looking for support or escape. She found neither. The elderly woman in seat 2B was watching her with undisguised disgust. Carlos Mendez was recording with his own phone. Even the passengers in the business class seats behind them had turned around to watch the confrontation. I think Victoria said, trying to regain some composure, that there may have been some confusion about my concerns. I was simply trying to ensure that the airline maintains its reputation for excellence. By demanding that a neurosurgeon be removed from business class because of how she looks, David asked. Through his earpiece, Elena updated him. Sir, we're now getting calls from NBC, ABC, CBS, and Fox News. The story is breaking on every major network. Stock price has stabilized as investors realize you're handling this proactively. Dr. Camila Rodriguez, who had remained quiet during the exchange, finally spoke up. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your support, but I don't need anyone to fight my battles for me. I've been dealing with this kind of treatment my entire career. I just want to get to my medical conference and present research that could help save children's lives. Her dignity in the moment was striking. Despite being harassed and insulted for the past 30 minutes, she remained focused on her mission to help others. Victoria, sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, jumped in. You see, she's perfectly fine. No harm was done. Perhaps we can all just take our seats and move on. No, David said firmly. Harm was absolutely done. You spent the last half hour harassing a passenger based on your assumptions about her appearance and background. You demanded she be removed from a seat she legitimately purchased. You questioned her professional credentials and suggested she was lying about being a doctor. And you did all of this while being recorded and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. Victoria's face began to flush again. I think you're overreacting to what was simply a misunderstanding between passengers. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Carlos Mendez called out from seat 2A. I've been sitting here for the entire thing. This lady was clearly harassing the doctor based on racial prejudice. That's not true. Victoria snapped her composure, finally cracking completely. I never mentioned race. I never said anything about skin color. You didn't have to said Eleanor Patterson, the elderly woman in seat 2B. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through decades of social change. Young lady, I'm 82 years old. I've seen this kind of behavior before. You may not have used racial slurs, but your meaning was crystal clear to everyone in this cabin. Victoria whirled around to face Eleanor. How dare you accuse me of racism? I have black friends. I support charities that help underprivileged communities. And yet David said quietly, you assumed that a black woman in scrubs couldn't possibly be a doctor, legitimately sitting in business class. Elena's voice came through his earpiece again. Sir, we've just received confirmation from Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Rodriguez completed an 18-hour surgery yesterday, removing a brain tumor from a 7-year-old patient. The surgery was successful and the child is expected to make a full recovery. This information is now being shared with news outlets. David nodded slightly, then addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone to understand exactly what happened here today. Dr. Camila Rodriguez is one of the most skilled pediatric neurosurgeons in the country. Yesterday, she spent 18 hours in an operating room saving a child's life. She's flying to Miami to present research that could revolutionize brain tumor treatment for children worldwide. He paused, looking directly at Victoria. And she was harassed by a passenger who decided, based solely on her appearance, that she didn't belong in business class. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Mr. Morrison, I think you're being manipulated by someone who's playing the victim card for attention. This whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion. That statement was a mistake. A big one. Dr. Rodriguez stood up slowly and faced Victoria directly. When she spoke, her voice was steady, professional, and devastating. Ma'am, 18 hours ago I was holding a surgical drill in my hands, removing a tumor from a 7-year-old boy's brain. One wrong move could have left him paralyzed for life. The responsibility I carry every day is to save children's lives using skills that took me 12 years of education and training to develop." She paused, letting that sink in. "I don't need to play any victim card. I don't need attention. I don't need validation from you or anyone else in this cabin. What I need is to get to Miami so I can share research that might help other doctors save more children's lives." Her words hit Victoria like a physical blow. For the first time since the confrontation began, Victoria seemed to realize the magnitude of what she had done. "The only thing I need from you," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "is for you to leave me alone so I can do my job, which is saving lives. Can you manage that?" Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. David Morrison looked around the business class cabin, taking in the faces of every passenger who had witnessed the confrontation. Then he made a decision that would define his legacy as CEO. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "you have exactly 2 choices. You can return to your seat, remain quiet for the duration of this flight, and consider this a learning experience. Or you can continue this behavior and face the full consequences of harassing a passenger on my airline." Victoria looked around the cabin one more time, seeing the judgment in every face, hearing the silence that followed David's ultimatum. She realized that her husband's connections, her social status, and her wealth meant absolutely nothing in this moment. She was facing justice, and she couldn't buy her way out of it. The livestream viewer count had just hit 400,000 people. The whole world was watching her decide what kind of person she wanted to be. Victoria Ashworth's hands trembled as she reached down to pick up the phone she had dropped. The device's screen showed 17 missed calls from her husband Richard and 43 text messages. The most recent one read, "What the hell are you doing? It's all over the news." Jake Morrison's TikTok livestream had exploded beyond anything he could have imagined. 450,000 people were watching live, and the video had already been shared over 100,000 times. The hashtag #Flight447 was trending in 12 countries. Elena Vasquez's voice came through David Morrison's earpiece with urgent updates. "Sir, we're getting calls from the White House press office. Senator Davis has issued a statement calling this exactly the kind of discrimination that federal oversight is designed to prevent. This is now a national story." David looked around the business class cabin, taking in the faces of every passenger who had witnessed the confrontation. The moment felt historic, like one of those instances when social change happens in real time, broadcast to the world through the lens of a college student's smartphone. Mrs. Ashworth David said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I want to be very clear about what happens next." Victoria tried to straighten her posture, but her designer confidence had completely evaporated. "Mr. Morrison, I think we can resolve this privately. There's no need for this to become a bigger situation than it already is. It became a bigger situation the moment you decided that Dr. Rodriguez didn't deserve to be treated with basic human dignity," David replied. "But you're right about one thing. This needs to be resolved, publicly." He turned to address the entire cabin, his voice carrying clearly to every passenger and through Jake's phone to nearly 500,000 viewers worldwide. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address what you've all witnessed today. American Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for passenger harassment and discrimination. What happened to Dr. Rodriguez is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of this company." Through his earpiece, Elena provided real-time updates. "Sir, American Airlines stock is actually rising now. Investors are responding positively to your leadership. We're getting overwhelmingly supportive comments across all social platforms." Victoria made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Mr. Morrison, surely we can handle this matter without involving the media or making it into some kind of public spectacle. The media is already involved, Mrs. Ashworth." The public spectacle began when you decided to harass a passenger in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. What I'm doing now is taking responsibility for ensuring it doesn't happen again. Dr. Camila Rodriguez, who had remained seated and composed throughout the exchange, finally stood up. When she spoke, her voice was steady and professional. Mr. Morrison, I want to say something to everyone who's watching this. She looked directly into Jake's camera, addressing the hundreds of thousands of people following the story in real time. I'm a neurosurgeon. I've dedicated my life to saving children with brain tumors. Yesterday, I operated for 18 hours to remove a tumor from a 7-year-old boy named Marcus Williams. Today, he's awake alert and expected to make a full recovery. She paused, letting that information settle. I'm flying to Miami to present research that could help other doctors around the world save more children like Marcus. That's my job. That's my calling. That's why I matter, not because of how I look, not because of what I'm wearing, but because of what I contribute to the world. The cabin was completely silent, except for the quiet hum of the aircraft's systems. Even Victoria had stopped moving, transfixed by Dr. Rodriguez's quiet power. To anyone watching who has ever been told they don't belong somewhere, remember this moment. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's prejudice. Your value isn't defined by their narrow vision of who deserves respect. Elena's voice crackled through David's earpiece. Sir, that statement is being shared across every platform. We're looking at one of the most positive viral moments in airline history. Dr. Rodriguez turned to look at Victoria directly. Ma'am, I hope you learned something today. I hope your children, if you have any, never have to experience what you put me through. And I hope that when you go home tonight, you think about the 7-year-old boy who's alive because I was in an operating room instead of worrying about whether I looked like I belonged there. Victoria's face had gone completely pale. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to grasp the full magnitude of what she had done. She had harassed a world-class pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives for a living. David Morrison stood up and addressed the cabin one final time. American Airlines is implementing immediate changes effective today. We're launching the Rodriguez Protocol, a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for every employee who interacts with passengers. We're creating a real-time reporting system for harassment incidents. And we're establishing a zero-tolerance policy with immediate consequences for passengers who harass other travelers. Through his earpiece, Elena confirmed Sir Legal has approved all protocols. We're prepared to implement immediately. Furthermore, David continued, Dr. Rodriguez will be joining our medical advisory board to help establish policies for healthcare professionals traveling for emergency purposes. We want to ensure that the people who save lives are never again harassed while trying to do their jobs. Jake's livestream chat was moving so fast it looked like digital snow. Comments of support for Dr. Rodriguez and condemnation of Victoria's behavior flooded in from around the world. Victoria finally found her voice again, but it came out as a whisper. I made a mistake. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her with the same professional compassion she probably showed to worried parents in hospital waiting rooms. Thank you for saying that. I hope you mean it. David Morrison pulled out his phone and made a call that every passenger in business class could hear. Elena, this is David. I want you to prepare a company-wide memo. Every employee needs to understand that the behavior we witnessed today is grounds for immediate termination if it comes from staff and immediate removal from our aircraft if it comes from passengers. He paused, looking directly at Victoria. I also want you to prepare a comprehensive review of Mrs. Ashworth's interaction with our staff and other passengers today. If our investigation confirms what I witnessed personally, she will be permanently banned from flying American Airlines. Victoria's face went white. Permanently banned. You can't do that. I'm a frequent flyer. I have status. My husband has connections. Your husband's connections don't override our passenger conduct policies, David replied calmly. And your frequent flyer status is meaningless if you use it to justify harassing other passengers. Elena's voice came through his earpiece one more time. Sir, we're now at 600,000 viewers on the primary stream. This is being covered by every major news outlet. The response is overwhelmingly positive for American Airlines and Dr. Rodriguez. David looked around the cabin one final time, taking in the faces of passengers who had witnessed something extraordinary. Justice happening in real time, broadcast to the world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this situation. We'll be departing for Miami shortly. Dr. Rodriguez, I hope your conference presentation goes well. The children you're working to save are lucky to have you. As flight attendants prepared for departure, Victoria Ashworth sat alone in seat 3B staring out the window. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages she was afraid to read. Her perfect life was unraveling in real time, broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. Dr. Camila Rodriguez put her headphones back on and closed her eyes. In a few hours, she would be in Miami sharing research that could revolutionize pediatric brain tumor treatment. Children around the world would benefit from her work. And Jake Morrison saved the live stream to his phone, knowing he had just documented one of the most important moments of social justice he would ever witness. The flight finally took off at 9:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour and 2 minutes behind schedule. But it was the most important hour in the history of American Airlines. As Flight 447 climbed to cruising altitude, the aftermath of the confrontation was already reshaping the landscape below. Elena Vasquez stood in the American Airlines Crisis Management Center, watching dozens of screens showing real-time social media feeds, news broadcasts, and data analytics. We've hit 2 million total views across all platforms. Marcus Chen, her deputy manager, announced to the room. BBC, CNN, Fox News, and Al Jazeera are all running the story as breaking news. Senator Davis is calling for congressional hearings on airline discrimination policies. Elena nodded, coordinating responses across multiple channels. The corporate response had to be swift, comprehensive, and authentic. David Morrison had given her the authority to act decisively, and she wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Upload the official statement now, she instructed her team. Within minutes, a carefully crafted response appeared on American Airlines' official social media accounts. American Airlines condemns the discriminatory behavior witnessed on Flight 447. Dr. Camila Rodriguez represents the best of American healthcare, a dedicated professional who saves children's lives daily. We stand with Dr. Rodriguez and are implementing immediate policy changes to ensure this never happens again. #Rodriguez. Protocol. #Dignity in the skies. Meanwhile, in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Victoria, Ashworth sat surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. Her phone showed 847 missed calls and over 2,000 text messages. The doorman had already called 3 times to inform her that reporters were gathering outside the building. Richard Ashworth's assistant had delivered divorce papers via messenger 30 minutes after the live stream ended. The envelope also contained a letter from Richard's legal team, informing her that all credit cards had been canceled and all joint accounts frozen pending legal proceedings. But the personal destruction was only the beginning. Elite Fitness, the exclusive Manhattan gym where Victoria held a lifetime membership, had sent a cancellation notice citing conduct incompatible with our community values. The Metropolitan Opera had revoked her season tickets. Even her hairdresser at the Pierre Hotel had left a voicemail saying she was no longer accepting Mrs. Ashworth as a client. Social media had turned Victoria into a symbol of entitled privilege and racial prejudice. #Victoria Ashworth was trending worldwide, but not in the way she had ever imagined being famous. Dr. Camila Rodriguez, meanwhile, was experiencing a completely different kind of viral fame. Mount Sinai Hospital's public relations department was fielding calls from medical journals, news outlets, and universities around the world. The hospital's donation page had received over $300,000 in contributions specifically designated for Dr. Rodriguez's brain tumor research. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief of staff, sent Dr. Rodriguez a text message that she read during the flight. "Camila, the entire medical community is proud of your grace under pressure. You've inspired countless young doctors today. Your research funding has been approved for the next 5 years. Focus on saving lives. We'll handle everything else." As the plane approached Miami International Airport, Jake Morrison's follower count had jumped from 12,000 to over 2 million. Major news networks were requesting interviews, and social media platforms were featuring his live stream as an example of citizen journalism at its finest. But Jake was already thinking beyond his newfound fame. He had witnessed something historic, and he wanted to ensure the moment led to lasting change. He began drafting a follow-up video that would focus not on his viral success, but on the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice. Elena Vasquez received a call from David Morrison as Flight 447 was beginning its descent into Miami. "Elena, what's the current status?" "Sir, this is the most positive viral moment in American Airlines history. Customer satisfaction surveys are showing record-high approval ratings. Booking numbers for the next week have increased by 15%. The Rodriguez protocol announcement has been viewed over 5 million times." David nodded, looking out the airplane window at the approaching Miami skyline, and Mrs. Ashworth complete social and professional isolation. Her husband filed for divorce, her social circle has abandoned her, and she's been banned from most of the exclusive venues she frequented. She's effectively been erased from New York high society. And Dr. Rodriguez Elena smiled. She's become a symbol of dignity and professionalism. Medical schools are using her response as a case study in grace under pressure. 3 universities have offered her department chair positions. She's been invited to speak at the United Nations about healthcare equality. As Flight 447 touched down in Miami, news crews were waiting at the gate. Not for Victoria Ashworth, who would deplane quietly and disappear into legal proceedings and public shame, but for Dr. Camila Rodriguez, who had become an overnight inspiration to millions of people. The Miami Medical Conference had rescheduled Dr. Rodriguez's presentation to the main auditorium to accommodate the international audience that wanted to hear from the neurosurgeon who had faced down discrimination with quiet dignity. Within hours, major medical journals were requesting exclusive interviews. Publishers were offering book deals. The MacArthur Foundation was fast-tracking her application for a Genius Grant. But Dr. Rodriguez remained focused on what mattered most, the children she could save, and the research that could revolutionize pediatric medicine. As passengers deplaned, Victoria Ashworth moved through the airport like a ghost, her designer outfit and perfect makeup unable to hide the fact that her world had collapsed in a single morning. Security escorted her through a side exit to avoid the media attention surrounding Dr. Rodriguez. The transformation was complete. The woman who had demanded that Dr. Rodriguez be removed from business class was now being escorted through back hallways like a criminal, while the doctor she had harassed was being celebrated as a hero. Justice, it seemed, had been served at 35,000 feet. As news crews gathered at Miami International Airport, the full scope of Dr. Camila Rodriguez's remarkable career began to emerge. What passengers on Flight 447 had witnessed wasn't just discrimination against any doctor. It was harassment of one of the most promising pediatric neurosurgeons in the world. Dr. Maria Santos, chief of pediatric surgery at Miami Children's Hospital, and Dr. Rodriguez's former mentor, stood before a crowd of reporters in the airport's main terminal. Camila Rodriguez represents everything we hope for in the next generation of medical professionals, Dr. Santos said. She combines exceptional surgical skill with genuine compassion for her patients and their families. In 5 years of practice, she has never lost a pediatric patient to surgical complications, a record that's virtually unheard of in neurosurgery. The backstory that emerged painted a picture of dedication that went far beyond professional excellence. Dr. Rodriguez had grown up in East Harlem, the daughter of a school custodian and a house cleaner. Both of her parents were immigrants who worked multiple jobs to support their family's dream of their daughter becoming a doctor. When Camila was 12 years old, her younger brother Diego was diagnosed with leukemia. I spent 2 years watching my brother fight for his life. Dr. Rodriguez explained to CNN medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta via phone from the Miami airport. I saw how the doctors and nurses became our family during the darkest time in our lives. I decided that I wanted to be the person who could give other families hope when everything seemed hopeless. Diego had survived and was now a teacher in the same elementary school where their father had worked as a janitor. But the experience had shaped Camila's entire approach to medicine. Dr. James Wilson, her department head at Mount Sinai Hospital, shared details that highlighted exactly who Victoria Ashworth had chosen to target. Dr. Rodriguez has performed over 400 pediatric brain surgeries. Dr. Wilson explained to NBC News, she specializes in cases that other surgeons consider inoperable. Parents come to her when they've been told there's no hope left for their children. The 7-year-old patient Dr. Rodriguez had operated on before Flight 447 was Marcus Williams, whose story became a powerful counterpoint to the morning's discrimination. Marcus's mother, Jennifer Williams, spoke to reporters from her son's hospital room. Dr. Rodriguez saved my baby's life. When every other doctor said the tumor was too close to critical brain areas, she found a way to remove it completely. Marcus is going to grow up and live a normal life because of her. Jennifer Williams, who was African American, added something that resonated across social media. To see someone attack Dr. Rodriguez for how she looks. That woman has no idea that the hands she was judging have saved hundreds of children, including my son. The research Dr. Rodriguez was presenting in Miami represented 3 years of groundbreaking work in pediatric brain tumor treatment. Her technique for using real-time MRI guidance during surgery had reduced surgical complications by 60% and increased survival rates for the most aggressive childhood brain tumors. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, president of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, put Dr. Rodriguez's work in perspective. Camila's research will save thousands of children's lives over the next decade. She's revolutionizing how we approach pediatric brain surgery. To think that she was harassed simply for how she looked after a night of saving a child's life. It's unconscionable. What made Dr. Rodriguez's response even more remarkable was the personal loss that had motivated her recent work. 8 months earlier, her father had died from brain cancer. Instead of taking time off, she had channeled her grief into research that could help other families avoid the loss she had experienced. She never told us about her father, said Dr. Rodriguez's research partner, Dr. Michael Chang. She just worked harder. She stayed later in the lab. She pushed herself to find better solutions. I think she knew that every breakthrough could mean another family wouldn't have to say goodbye. The Miami Medical Conference had originally scheduled Dr. Rodriguez to speak to about 200 pediatric surgeons. Now, with international attention focused on her story, they moved her presentation to the main auditorium that seated 1,500 people. Medical professionals from around the world had flown in specifically to hear her research. Dr. Anderson Williams, the conference director, announced that the entire presentation would be live-streamed to medical schools and hospitals worldwide. Dr. Rodriguez has shown us that excellence and grace under pressure go hand in hand. Her research deserves the widest possible audience, but perhaps the most powerful testament to Dr. Rodriguez's character came from an unexpected source, her patients' families. The parents of children she had saved organized a social media campaign called #SavedByDrRodriguez. Hundreds of families shared photos and stories of children who were alive and healthy because of her surgical skill. The posts painted a picture of a surgeon who didn't just save lives, but who treated each family with extraordinary compassion. Dr. Rodriguez sat with us for 2 hours the night before my daughter's surgery, wrote Maria Gonzalez. She explained every step of the procedure, answered every question, and promised she would treat Maya like her own child. She kept that promise. Another parent, David Kim, shared, "When my son woke up from surgery, Dr. Rodriguez was there holding his hand. She had been operating for 14 hours, but she stayed until he opened his eyes." That's the kind of person Victoria Ashworth attacked on that airplane. As Dr. Rodriguez prepared for her conference presentation, the contrast couldn't have been starker. While Victoria Ashworth was hiding from reporters and dealing with the destruction of her social standing, Dr. Rodriguez was preparing to share research that would help doctors around the world save more children's lives. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in business class was now being celebrated as one of the most important medical researchers of her generation. The 8-year-old boy who had inspired her to become a doctor, her brother Diego, sent her a text message that she read just before taking the stage in Miami. "Sis, I watched the whole thing online. You handled that with the same grace you've shown our family for 20 years. Dad would be proud. Now go save more kids." Dr. Camila Rodriguez walked onto the conference stage to a standing ovation from 1,500 medical professionals and a live stream audience of over 1 million people worldwide. She had turned discrimination into inspiration, harassment into hope, and prejudice into progress. 3 months after Flight 447, the aviation industry had transformed its approach to passenger harassment and discrimination. The Rodriguez Protocol had become the gold standard for airline customer service training adopted by major carriers worldwide. Elena Vasquez stood before the International Air Transport Association annual conference in Geneva, presenting American Airlines' comprehensive anti-discrimination program to airline executives from 60 countries. The Rodriguez Protocol isn't just about preventing harassment, Elena explained to the global audience. It's about creating an environment where every passenger feels respected and valued regardless of their background, appearance, or profession. The protocol included mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees, real-time social media monitoring for harassment incidents, and immediate escalation procedures that connected frontline staff directly to senior management. Most importantly, it established clear consequences for passengers who harassed others, including permanent bans from airline services. American Airlines had seen remarkable results. Customer satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, with particular improvements in ratings from passengers of color and healthcare workers. The airline's stock price had increased by 23%, driven by improved public perception and increased bookings from travelers who wanted to fly with a company that took discrimination seriously. Other airlines quickly followed suit. Delta implemented the Dignity First program. United launched Respectful Skies. Southwest created Hospitality for All. Within 6 months, every major airline in the United States had comprehensive anti-discrimination policies directly inspired by the Flight 447 incident. The changes extended beyond aviation. The American Hotel and Lodging Association adopted similar protocols for their member properties. Uber and Lyft implemented anti-harassment training for drivers. Even cruise lines began requiring sensitivity training for staff members. Dr. Camila Rodriguez had become more than just a victim who stood up for herself. She had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. The Miami Medical Conference presentation had been viewed over 10 million times. Medical schools were using her research to train the next generation of pediatric neurosurgeons. Children's hospitals worldwide were implementing her techniques, resulting in improved outcomes for young patients with brain tumors. But Dr. Rodriguez remained focused on her primary mission, saving children's lives. 6 months after Flight 447, she had performed an additional 87 successful surgeries. Her research had led to breakthrough treatments that were being tested in clinical trials across 4 countries. The MacArthur Foundation had awarded her a Genius Grant providing 5 years of funding for her work. Victoria Ashworth, meanwhile, had effectively disappeared from public life. The divorce proceedings had stripped her of access to her husband's wealth. The viral video had made her unemployable in any public-facing role. She had moved to a small apartment in New Jersey as far from her former Manhattan social circle as possible. Richard Ashworth had issued a public statement distancing himself from his wife's behavior and donating $2 million to Mount Sinai Hospital's pediatric neurosurgery department in Dr. Rodriguez's name. The donation had funded new equipment and research opportunities that would benefit children for decades to come. Jake Morrison had parlayed his viral video into a career in documentary filmmaking. His follow-up projects focused on social justice issues, and he credited the Flight 447 incident with teaching him the importance of bearing witness to injustice. He had been accepted to film school at NYU and planned to focus on stories about everyday heroes like Dr. Rodriguez. The regulatory impact had been substantial. The Department of Transportation had proposed new federal requirements for anti-discrimination training in the aviation industry. Several states had introduced legislation specifically protecting healthcare workers from harassment while traveling for work. Senator Davis, who had been following the story since the viral video, invited Dr. Rodriguez to testify before Congress about discrimination in travel. Her testimony had been instrumental in passing the Healthcare Worker Protection Act, which established federal protections for medical professionals traveling for emergency cases or conferences. The cultural impact was perhaps even more significant than the policy changes. #Rodriguez Protocol had become shorthand for standing up to discrimination with dignity and grace. Schools were using Dr. Rodriguez's response as an example of leadership under pressure. Business schools were analyzing David Morrison's decision-making as a case study in corporate crisis management. Dr. Rodriguez had received honorary degrees from 12 universities and speaking invitations from organizations around the world. But she continued to divide her time between surgery research and patient care, never losing sight of her primary mission. The real victory, she told 60 Minutes in an interview 6 months after the flight, isn't that I became famous or that policies changed, though those things are important. The real victory is that maybe the next doctor or teacher or nurse who faces discrimination will remember this story and know they don't have to accept being treated badly. The children she had saved provided the most meaningful measure of success. Marcus Williams, the 7-year-old patient she had operated on before Flight 447 had returned to school and was thriving. His tumor had shown no signs of returning, and his cognitive function was completely normal. Dr. Rodriguez didn't just save my son's life, Jennifer Williams told reporters. She saved our entire family's future. That's what that woman on the plane was attacking, someone who gives families hope. American Airlines had commissioned a documentary about the Flight 447 incident and its aftermath. The film, titled Dignity at 35,000 Feet, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was being distributed to schools and organizations as an educational tool about unconscious bias and the power of standing up for what's right. David Morrison had been named CEO of the Year by Airline Industry Publications, but he insisted the recognition belonged to Dr. Rodriguez and the passengers who spoke up when they witnessed injustice. The airplane where the incident occurred, tail number N234AA, had been renamed Dr. Camila Rodriguez in her honor. A plaque in the business class cabin commemorated the moment when dignity triumphed over discrimination. Flight 447 had become more than just a trip from New York to Miami. It had become a symbol of how ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they refused to accept injustice as normal. Dr. Camila Rodriguez stood in Operating Room 7 at Mount Sinai Hospital, her hands steady as she performed her most complex surgery yet. The patient was a 3-year-old girl named Sophia, whose brain tumor had been deemed inoperable by 4 other surgical teams. Scalpel Dr. Rodriguez said quietly, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had impressed millions of people watching Flight 447 coverage 6 months earlier. The surgical techniques she had refined since her Miami presentation were now being used in children's hospitals across 30 countries. Her research had led to a 67% improvement in survival rates for the most aggressive pediatric brain tumors. The little girl on the operating table would benefit from innovations that had emerged from the darkest moment of Dr. Rodriguez's professional life. Outside the OR, the world had indeed changed. American Airlines had won the International Customer Service Excellence Award for their comprehensive anti-discrimination program. The Rodriguez Protocol had been adopted by airlines, hotels, and transportation companies worldwide. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 80% across the travel industry. Jake Morrison was in his second semester at NYU Film School working on a documentary about healthcare workers who had been discriminated against while traveling for work. His Flight 447 video had been viewed over 50 million times and was being used in sensitivity training programs around the world. Victoria Ashworth had completed a court-mandated sensitivity training program and was volunteering at a community center in Newark, New Jersey. She had written a letter to Dr. Rodriguez apologizing for her behavior, though she had never sent it. The viral incident had cost her everything she thought mattered, but had forced her to confront prejudices she had never acknowledged. David Morrison had been promoted to chairman of American Airlines Board of Directors with his handling of the Flight 447 incident, cited as exemplary corporate leadership. Under his guidance, the airline had become a model for how companies could turn crisis into opportunity by taking a firm stand on social justice issues. The surgical monitor in OR7 showed Sophia's vital signs remaining stable as Dr. Rodriguez carefully removed the tumor that had threatened the child's life. The same hands that Victoria Ashworth had deemed unworthy of business class were performing microsurgery that would allow a 3-year-old to grow up, go to school, and live a normal life. Tumor completely removed, Dr. Rodriguez announced to her surgical team 7 hours later. Clean margins. No damage to surrounding tissue. Sophia's parents, who had been told by other doctors that their daughter had no hope, would soon learn that the neurosurgeon who had been harassed on an airplane for her appearance had given their child a future. Dr. Rodriguez removed her surgical gloves and walked to the family waiting room where she would deliver the good news that would change a family's life forever. It was the same quiet dignity she had shown in Seat 3A of Flight 447. But now it was focused on what mattered most, saving children's lives. The woman who had been told she didn't belong was exactly where she was meant to be. I've been creating content about workplace justice and dignity for over 3 years now, but the story of Dr. Camila Rodriguez and Flight 447 changed how I think about real courage. I've told hundreds of stories about people standing up to discrimination, but I've never seen anyone handle injustice with such grace under pressure. What struck me most wasn't the viral moment or the corporate response. It was Dr. Rodriguez's unwavering focus on what actually mattered. While Victoria Ashworth was screaming about seat assignments and status levels, Dr. Rodriguez was thinking about the children she needed to help in Miami. While the internet was exploding with outrage, she remained centered on her mission to save lives. That's the difference between real strength and performed strength. Victoria thought strength meant demanding that others be diminished to make her feel important. Dr. Rodriguez showed that true strength means maintaining your dignity and purpose, even when people try to tear you down. I learned something profound from watching David Morrison's response too. When you have real authority, you don't need to announce it or flex it to intimidate people. Morrison let Victoria reveal exactly who she was before he revealed who he was. He gathered information, assessed the situation, and then used his power to protect someone who needed protection. That's what leadership looks like. But here's what really matters about this story. It didn't end with the viral video or the news coverage. Dr. Rodriguez went back to saving children's lives. The Rodriguez protocol is protecting passengers every day. Victoria Ashworth is hopefully learning to see people as human beings rather than status symbols. Change happened because people chose not to be silent. Jake Morrison could have kept his phone in his pocket. Carlos Mendez could have minded his own business. Eleanor Patterson could have stayed quiet. David Morrison could have handled this privately to avoid bad publicity. Instead, they all chose to stand up when they witnessed injustice. That's the real lesson here. You don't need to be a CEO or a neurosurgeon to make a difference. You just need to be willing to speak up when you see someone being treated badly because of how they look or where someone else thinks they belong. If this story moved you, here's what I want you to remember. The next time you see someone being harassed or discriminated against you, have a choice. You can be Victoria Ashworth and contribute to the problem. You can be a silent bystander and allow it to continue, or you can be like the passengers on Flight 447 who refused to let injustice happen in front of them. Dr. Rodriguez saved a 3-year-old's life this morning. Victoria Ashworth is learning to volunteer at a community center. David Morrison is leading an airline that treats every passenger with dignity. Jake Morrison is documenting stories of people who make the world better. Choose wisely. The world is watching even when you think no one will notice. Your voice matters. Use it. If you believe in treating every person with dignity regardless of how they look or what they do for work, please share this story. Real change happens when good people refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. Subscribe for more stories about courage, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right.